In other words, in a strictly constructivist environment, one in which only discovery learning took place, there is no guarantee of a particular behavior emerging even though the society or the individual may desire such behavior. This is Skinner's point. If we desire such behavior, we have to set up the contingencies in such a manner that the behavior will arise. This includes teaching discovery. We now have to move forward and have a definition of learning that will allow us to determine when changes have taken place. The traditional definition was offered by Kimball in 1961 and says that learning is a relatively permanent change in response potentiality which occurs as a result of reinforced practice. Some of the strengths of Kimball's definition include identifying one's experiences, what we would refer to as reinforced practice, as being important in learning. Secondly, Kimball also distinguishes learning from other forms of behavior change, such as maturation, or fatigue, or drug-induced conditions. There is also a weakness in Kimball's definition of learning. His definition suggests that learning involves an intervening internal state that mediates between a stimulus event and the subsequent behavior. Radical behaviorism avoids the use of such mediational processes as explanations of behavior. Rather, the explanation is sought in the interaction between the person's genetic makeup and the person's environmental histories. Due to the lack of time, we cannot go into this topic in any detail at this point, but for the interested person, you may review Skinner on Cognition in Donahue and Szymanski's article. J. Moore has proposed a somewhat modified view or definition of learning. He suggests that learning is simply a name that is used to describe changes in behavior that occur as a result of particular postnatal experiences. The definition suggests that certain behavioral changes take place. These changes are in response topography, response magnitude, response frequency, response duration, and the response context. In other words, what we see in Moore's definition is that behavior is not strictly determined. Rather, behavior, although determined, other functions come into play, and these other functions may lead to a different behavior in topography, magnitude, frequency, duration, or context. The goals of learning then involve the presentation of postnatal experiences that are going to influence behavior and the processes by which the behavior change will occur. So let us review. Our goal is to understand how we are to humanize education through technology. In humanizing education through technology, there are certain considerations we have to take into consideration if we are going to be ethical and moral in regards to our clientele. Our clientele in this case is the society we serve. That society we serve includes students. There are philosophical considerations we have to take into consideration, such as the notion of determinism. There are theoretical considerations. This determines whether our focus will be on some hypothetical construct that is supposedly inside the person, or whether we are going to look at the person's genetic history interacting with the person's environmental history. Such considerations led Skinner to develop free operant techniques to education, culminating in his book on the technology of teaching. The strength of operant techniques and the philosophy behind radical behaviorism, some of the topics on which I've briefly touched in this presentation, were the genesis for additional educational interventions. One of those educational interventions which have seen considerable success is the personalized system of instruction, also known as the Keller plan or PSI, that was developed by Fred Keller. Another approach is precision teaching, devised by Ogden Lindsley. Additional methods have been devised that I will not review in this presentation. Behavior analytic techniques have also been used in such projects as project follow-through, and many texts have been written regarding the achievements of behavior analysis in education. You may also read The Focus on Behavior Analysis in Education, Achievements, Challenges, and Opportunities for further details on these ideas. Might there be a resurgence of self-paced instruction based on free operant techniques given the current technology? To answer the question whether we can humanize education through technology, we must examine technology. First, there are several non-critical components of technology. Technology must not be seen as anything more than a mode of delivery. Technology is not a mode of instruction, and the material cannot simply be programmed. This has been one of the failures in self-paced instruction. From my perspective, there are several critical components in establishing a good, scientifically based, self-paced program that will allow education to be humanized through the use of technology. One is understanding the theory behind radical behaviorism. As noted, the theory becomes important in understanding how development proceeds. Secondly, knowing how to effectively manage contingencies is crucial in understanding how free operands are used in establishing educational programs. The contingencies take place at both the individual and the group level. Third, knowing how to effectively incorporate verbal behavior is important in the design of self-paced instruction. Fourth, knowing operant research methodology. Such methodology is often referred to as single case or single subject designs. These are considerably different than case studies and often confused or confusing use of the terms single case or single subject. Such single subject methodology is used to evaluate the individual's progress. This is crucial if each person is going to be treated as a unique human being with a particular genetic and an environmental history. Our goal is to use teaching, in other words, the use of contingencies, to help that individual achieve his or her utmost potential. The third presentation is by Dean Cruz. He will talk about the technology of teaching. He will present John Carroll's view of learning and how Carroll's view informed Bloom's model of mastery learning. He will also deal with Fisher's academic learning to time. The contributions by Bloom and Fisher were then used to examine what happens in schools. Eventually, these models were tested using Skinner's personal instruction model.
My name is Dean Cruz. I will be discussing briefly the technology of teaching. Before we do that, there are a couple of themes that we need to be reminded of. First, behavior is lawful and determined. In Skinner's words, that includes learning behavior. Second, again, in Skinner's words, teaching is the expediting of learning. A person who is taught learns more quickly than one who is not. And finally, according to Bijou and Baer, learning is defined as progressive change in the interaction between the behavior of an individual and the people, objects, and events in that person's environment. In 1962, as he was trying to teach soldiers foreign languages, John Carroll developed a model of school learning. He explained it more completely in 1963, and in 1967 conducted experiments to test the validity of the model. Carroll identified 5 variables in 2 main classes that are involved in learning. The first were instructional variables, or what we're going to call environmental variables. There are 2, the quality of instruction and opportunity to learn. Within the class of individual difference variables, there are 3. A student's aptitude for learning the task to a specified criterion, a student's ability to understand instruction, and student perseverance. According to Carroll, a complex learning task is best regarded as being composed of a series of subtasks that may be learned with varying degrees of perfection. The degree of learning is measured in terms of the amount of success achieved over a fixed period of time, which may range from minutes for short-term learning tasks to even months for more complex tasks. The amount of learning, expressed as a percentage of the criterion reached, then, in Carroll's model, is a function of how much time the learner actually spends in learning in relationship to the amount of time that he needs to learn. The efficiency of learning, again expressed as a percentage, is a function of the relationship between the student's optimal learning rate and the rate at which he is actually learning. Let's make that a little bit more concrete. Suppose that we have a student who needs 10 hours to learn to do a particular task. We'll say he's trying to learn how to do long division starting from a knowledge of simple division. The student who needs 10 hours to learn and actually spends 10 hours on the task learns 100% of the task. He's also learning at 100% efficiency. But unfortunately, we all know that not all students complete their learning, and not all students learn at 100% efficiency. So we're going to need to discover the things that can be involved. In order to do that, we need to break down this function. Of the 5 variables that Carroll originally identified, time spent is composed of 2. The first is an individual level variable. We call it perseverance, the extent to which students take advantage of the opportunity to learn, and it's measured by engagement rate, or the percentage of allocated time that students were actively engaged.